Hello, and welcome to this new video. It's been quite a while since my last one, but I'm happy to be back, and I hope you're happy to see me. My setup has changed slightly today. I'm trying a different way of putting my microphone and camera together. I'm still experimenting with all of this tech stuff, so let's see how this comes out. We'll see if the clicking from my last video has stopped and whether this looks good. I'm a little bit, I've had quite a lazy day today, and I'm possibly looking a little bit rough, so I can only apologise for that. But without further ado, I think we should get into this video, which is, I thought I would read the first chapter of a book a friend of mine has lent to me. It's this book here. I don't know much about it, and I've never read it before, or any of it before, so it's going to be a journey we do together. Thought I'd read the first chapter today, and then possibly in the future we could maybe read the second chapter. This is a book by Francoise Sagan, a French writer, and the book is called Bonjour Tristesse, which I believe means hello sadness. My French is really quite poor, so please correct me on my poor pronunciation. But this is in English, this is a translation. So, let's see if I can get the book into view. Possibly not. Let's try this. If I do that, we'll have a bit of the book as well. Okay, and I'm going to try and softly speak this, and maybe do little bits of whispering. We'll just see what happens. This is all sight read, so we'll see how it goes. I've got 6 pages in chapter 1. So, here we go. Actually, I'll have some water just before we start. It's always good to hydrate. Okay, here we go. A strange melancholy pervades me, to which I hesitate to give the grave and beautiful name of sadness. In the past, the idea of sadness always appealed to me. Now I'm almost ashamed of its complete egoism. I had known boredom, regret, and at times remorse, but never sadness. Today something envelops me like a silken web, enervating and soft, which isolates me. That summer I was 17 and perfectly happy. I lived with my father, and there was also Elsa, who for the time being was his mistress. I must explain this situation at once, or it might give a false impression. My father was 40 and had been a widower for 15 years. He was young for his age, full of vitality and possibilities, and when I left school 2 years before, I soon noticed that he lived with a woman. It took me rather longer to realise that it was a different one every 6 months, but gradually his charm, my new easy life, and my own disposition led me to accept it. He was a frivolous man, clever at business, always curious, quickly bored, and attractive to women. It was easy to love him, for he was kind, generous, gay, and full of affection for me. I cannot imagine a better or more amusing friend. At the beginning of summer, He even went so far as to ask me whether I would object to Elsa's company during the holidays. She was a tall, red-haired girl, sensual and worldly, gentle, rather simple, and unpretentious. One might have come across her any day in the studios and bars of the I don't know how to say this word. Champs-Élysées. Yes, that word. I encouraged him to invite her. He needed women around him, and I knew that Elsa would not get in our way. In any case, my father and I were so delighted at the prospect of going away together that we were in no mood to cavil in anything. He had rented a large white villa on the Mediterranean, for which we had been longing since the spring. It was remote and beautiful, and stood on a promontory dominating the sea, hidden from the road by a pine wood. A mule path led down to a tiny creek where the sea lapped against rust-coloured rocks. The first days were dazzling. We spent hours on the beach overwhelmed by the heat and gradually amusing a healthy golden tan, except Elsa, whose skin reddened and peeled, causing her atrocious suffering. My father performed all sorts of complicated leg exercises to reduce a rounding stomach unsuitable for a Don Juan. From dawn onwards, I was in the water. It was cool and transparent, and I plunged wildly about it in my efforts to wash away the shadows and dust of the city. I lay full length on the sand, took up a handful and let it run through my hair, through my fingers in soft yellow streams. I told myself that it ran out like time. It was an idle thought, and it was pleasant to have idle thoughts, for it was summer. On the 6th day, I saw Cyril. He was sailing a small boat which capsized in front of our creek. We had a good deal of fun rescuing his possessions, during which he told me his name, that he was studying law, and was spending his holidays with his mother in a neighbouring villa. He looked typically Latin, and was very dark and sunburnt. There was something reliable and protective about him which I liked at once. Usually I avoided university students, whom I considered rough and only interested in themselves and their own problems, which they dramatised or used as an excuse for their boredom. I did not care for young people. I much preferred my father's friends, men of 40, who spoke to me with courtesy and tenderness, and treated me with the gentleness of a father or a lover. But Cyril was different. He was tall and sometimes beautiful, with the sort of good looks that immediately inspire one with confidence. Although I did not share my father's aversion to ugliness, which often led us to associate with stupid people, I felt vaguely uncomfortable with anyone devoid of physical charms. The resignation to the fact that they were unattractive seemed to me somehow indecent. When Cyril left, he offered to teach me to sail. I went up to dinner absorbed by my thoughts and hardly joined in the conversation. Neither did I pay much attention to my father's nervousness. After dinner, we lay in chairs on the terrace as usual. The sky was studded with stars. I gazed upwards, vaguely hoping to see a sudden, exciting flash across the heavens, but it was early in July and too soon for meteors. On the terrace, the crickets were chirruping. There must have been thousands of them, drunk with heat and moonlight, pouring out their strange song all night long. I had been told they were only rubbing their wing cases together, but I preferred to believe that it came from the throat, guttural and instinctive like the purr of a cat. We were very comfortable. Only some tiny grains of sand between my skin and my shirt kept me from dropping off to sleep. Suddenly my father coughed, apologetically, and sat up. "Someone is coming to stay," he announced. I shut my eyes tightly. We were too peaceful. It just couldn't last. "Hurry up and tell us who it is," cried Elsa, always avid for gossip. "Anne Larson," said my father, and he turned towards me. I could hardly believe my ears. Anne was the last person I would have thought of. She had been a friend of my mother's, and had very little connection with my father. But all the same, when I left school 2 years before, and my father was at his wit's end about me, he had asked her to take me in hand. Within a week, she had dressed me in the right clothes and taught me something of life. I remember thinking her the most wonderful person and being quite embarrassingly fond of her, but she was soon fond of me. But she soon found me a young man to whom I could transfer my affections. To her, I owed my first glimpse of elegance and my first flirtation, and I was very grateful. At 42, she was a most attractive woman, much sought after, with a beautiful face, proud, tired, and indifferent. This indifference was the only complaint one could make against her. She was amiable and distant. Everything about her denoted a strong will and an inner serenity which were disconcerting. Although divorced, she seemed to have no attachments. But then we did not know the same people. Her friends were clever, intelligent, and discreet. Ours, from whom my father demanded only good looks or amusement, were noisy and insatiable. I think she rather despised us for our love of diversion and frivolity, as she despised all extremeness. We had few points of contact. She was concerned with fashion, and my father with publicity. So they met occasionally at business dinners. Then there was the memory of my mother. And lastly, my own determined efforts to keep in touch, because although she intimidated me, I greatly admired her. In short, her sudden arrival appeared disastrous in view of Elsa's presence and Anne's ideas on education. Elsa went up to bed after making close inquiries about Anne's social position. I remained alone with my father and moved to the steps, where I sat at his feet. He leaned forward and laid his hands on my shoulders. "Why are you so upset, darling? You look like a little wild cat. I'd rather have a beautiful fair-haired daughter, a bit plump, with china blue eyes, and that's hardly the point," I said. "What made you invite Anne, and why did she accept?" "Perhaps she wants to see your old father. One never knows." "You're not the type of man who interests Anne," I said. "She's too intelligent and thinks too much of herself. And what about Elsa? Have you thought of her? Can you imagine a conversation between Elsa and Anne? I can't." "I'm afraid it hadn't occurred to me," he confessed. "But you're right. It's a dreadful thought. Cecile, my sweet, shall we go back to Paris?" He laughed softly and rubbed the back of my neck. I turned to look at him. His dark eyes gleamed. Funny little wrinkles marked their edges. His mouth turned up slightly. He looked like a fawn. I laughed with him, as I always did when he created complications for himself. "My little accomplice," he said. "What would I do without you?" From the tender inflection of his voice, I knew that he would have really been unhappy. Late into the night, we talked of love, of its complications. In my father's eyes, they were imaginary. He refused categorically all notions of fidelity and serious commitments. He explains that they were arbitrary and sterile. From anyone else, such views would have shocked me, but I knew that in this case, they did not exclude either tenderness or devotion. Feelings which came all the more easily to him, since he was determined that they should be transient. This conception of rapid, violent, and passing love affairs appealed to my imagination. I was not at the age when fidelity is attractive. I knew very little about love. Well, that's chapter 1 of Bonjour Tristesse. Yes, lovely. It's quite a nice story, I think, so far. Sorry for all of the stutterings and little blips and blops, but I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know if that is something you would like to see more of. If you enjoyed that, or if there's anything else you'd like to see. I've been looking over here quite a lot because that's where my phone is with the monitor for my camera. So I need to keep remembering to look into the main camera. Yes. I'll see you soon. Sooner than the previous gap between videos, I'm hoping. Please like, subscribe, leave me a comment or a message or whatever. And I'll see you next time.